guys, it's Alice, and today I'm going to talk about the books I've read so far in June. I've got 4 books to talk about today, and the first one is The Last by Hannah Jameson. This is an apocalyptic mystery thriller, and it's about a group of people who are stranded at this hotel in Switzerland after nuclear war has erupted in the world. And we follow a historian who was at the hotel for a conference, and he becomes obsessed with trying to find out what happened to this young girl that they find in the hotel water tank. This was a very entertaining and interesting book, although it's not without its faults. I really enjoyed reading this. It's a very readable book, and the setting of this is fantastic. I really liked getting to know the group of people that were at the hotel and seeing them try to figure out group dynamics and just grappling with what has happened to the world. It was equal parts fascinating and terrifying to see the different characters react to some time passing, and the supplies are starting to dwindle and everyone is sort of panicking about where the road is going to lead next. I also really liked, I don't want to spoil it, but there are some parts in this where the group has to make some really difficult decisions, and I really liked that that was in here. Next to that though, there are some things in this that just fell a little bit flat for me. Like, the mystery of the murdered girl was surprisingly irrelevant, and the excitement of that tapers off quite quickly, and I completely lost interest in it, to be honest. I also would have loved to dig a little bit deeper into what actually happens to a world where nuclear war has killed so many people, and I would have loved to know what made that war erupt in the first place. I also thought the ending was kind of rushed and underwhelming, and I just feel like the book went a little bit downhill in like the last 100 pages. This is the kind of book where I really enjoyed the experience of reading it, but it feels like the story sort of just scratches the surface of what it could have explored, so I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. I do think it's worth a read if you like apocalyptic fiction. Secondly, I read an ebook, and it was Oil and Honey by Bill McKibben. This is a memoir, and in it the author recounts his experiences of becoming an environmental activist. Alright, so I don't really know what I expected from this book, but whatever it was that I got was just, it wasn't for me. I don't really have that much to say about this, to be honest. It really is just kind of the author traveling around the world and trying to raise awareness of the damage that we're doing to our planet and trying to make some changes about that. My biggest problem with this is that I thought it was just kind of boring. Every time I sat down to read this, I would get like a few pages into the chapter and my interest would just dwindle. And the further into the book I got, the sooner in the chapter that happened. And I was really surprised by that, because the theme of the book is something that I'm usually incredibly interested by. The only thing I did like about this were the parts about beekeeping and getting to know the author's friend who worked on his own beekeeping farm. But other than that, I don't really know what else to say. I was just really bored by it, so I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. Second to last, I finished Bury What We Cannot Take by Kristen Chen. This is historical fiction, and it's set in China, and we follow a family living under Maoist rule. And the family decide to try and escape to Hong Kong. And they do that under the ruse of a family member being sick. So they tell people that they're coming back, they're just gonna go visit this family member, but they actually have no intention of returning. When they try to get exit permits for the whole family, they can't get them all at the same time. So they actually end up leaving their youngest daughter behind. This was a pretty interesting book, but I felt like it lost itself a little bit towards the ending. I think the book starts off really strong, and I thought reading about the communist regime and the oppression that the family experiences was really interesting, as well as just seeing them deal with that situation differently, as well as some of them having gone to Hong Kong and trying to make a new life for themselves, while trying to deal with the fact that they left someone behind back home. I especially loved reading from the mother's and the grandmother's perspective and seeing them grapple with their emotions, as well as reading from the perspective of the young girl who was left behind and seeing her try to come to terms with what has actually happened. That being said, some of the characters in this feel a little bit one-dimensional, and like I mentioned, I think the story just loses itself a little bit, and I thought that it got a little bit repetitive and I just lost a little bit of interest. And then the ending I thought was a little underwhelming. It's one of those books that starts off really well, but then it just sort of tapers off a little bit. And I think that the themes in this book are so interesting, but the book doesn't really do anything special with the writing or the characters or the plot really to make it stand out, if that makes sense. So I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Lastly, I finished Terra Nullius by Claire G. Coleman. This is a dystopian novel and it's set in future Australia, where a people referred to as the settlers have colonized the country and they are trying to achieve peace and they will do anything to get there. Whereas the natives are, of course, eager for freedom from their oppressors. I really liked this. I thought it was fascinating and exciting and well worth the read. The themes in this are really interesting and it gives such a clear picture of the destruction of colonization, and it obviously comments on our own history. I really liked getting into the heads of the characters and I thought it was really interesting to see the kinds of thought processes that makes people look at someone else and think that they're an animal. There's something really terrifying about that, and I think that the reason it's so terrifying is that you can clearly picture people from our history thinking like that. I also really loved this thing, which I don't actually know if it's a spoiler or if it was just me who didn't get it until halfway through the book, so I'm gonna err on the side of caution. But I didn't realize who the settlers were until like halfway through, and when I realized, I was like, oh, that's what's going on, and that made me even more excited to keep going. I will say though that I do think that the theme in this book and what it's trying to convey is very clear. Like, it's almost too clear, and I think trying to get the point across sometimes overpowered the whole story and all of the characters. I really liked the characters in this, but I do wish some of them had been a little bit better developed. There are also parts in here where you get to learn about something that's going on and you're like, oh my god, what the hell is going on with that? But then you never hear about it again and you don't really get anywhere with it. Overall though, this is a great commentary on colonization and it really made me think and reflect. So I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. It's very well worth the read. Now onto the book that I'm currently reading. I have just started The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And this is historical fiction, but I'm not really that far into it, so I can't tell you that much about what it's about. But it's about a Hollywood icon who is finally ready to tell the world about her very scandalous and glamorous life. And I've heard so many amazing things about this book, so I'm very excited to get into it. Okay guys, those were all the books that I had to talk about today. I'd love to know what you all have been reading lately, and I will see you soon. Bye!